I was only trying to help." Those were the words a father whispered through tears as he watched his grown son fail for the 100th time. For 25 years, he had protected his boy from every struggle, solved every problem, removed every obstacle. He thought he was being a good father. He thought love meant making life easy. But standing in that hospital room, watching his son broken by a world he was never prepared to face, the father finally understood the terrible truth. By saving his son from every struggle, he had stolen from him the very thing he needed most, the strength that only comes from fighting your own battles. This is the story of a man who learned life's hardest lesson through a dying butterfly and a broken son. A lesson that will change how you see struggle, pain, and what it truly means to love someone. In a quiet suburban neighborhood where oak trees lined the streets and children played in manicured yards, there lived a man named Richard Holloway. He was 52 years old, a successful architect who had built his career designing buildings that would stand for centuries. His hands had crafted structures that defied gravity. His mind had solved engineering problems that baffled others, and his reputation was built on one simple principle: prepare for every weakness, reinforce every vulnerability, leave nothing to chance. Richard applied this same philosophy to fatherhood with absolute dedication. His son, Daniel, had been born premature, spending his first 3 weeks of life in an incubator, fighting to breathe, fighting to survive. Richard had stood at that incubator day and night, watching his tiny son struggle, feeling utterly helpless. He made a promise in that hospital. He swore to God, to himself, to his fragile son, that he would never let Daniel struggle like that again. He would protect him from every pain, shield him from every hardship, carry him over every obstacle. Daniel would never have to fight for anything. Richa would fight for him. Richard's wife, Margaret, had died when Daniel was only 3 years old. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday afternoon had taken her in an instant, leaving Richard alone with a toddler and a heart full of grief. The loss only intensified his protective instincts. Daniel was all he had left. Daniel was everything, and Richard would do anything, sacrifice anything, give anything to keep his son safe from the cruel world that had already taken so much from them both. From the moment Daniel could walk, Richard was there to catch him before he fell. From the moment Daniel could talk, Richard was there to speak for him before he struggled. When Daniel had trouble tying his shoes, Richard tied them. When Daniel had difficulty with homework, Richard did it for him. When Daniel had conflicts with other children, Richard intervened and solved them. When Daniel faced any challenge, any obstacle, any moment of discomfort, Richard swooped in like a guardian angel and made it disappear. The other parents in the neighborhood noticed. Some admired Richard's devotion. "What a dedicated father," they would say. Others worried. "That boy will never learn to stand on his own," they whispered. But Richard didn't care what anyone thought. He knew what it felt like to watch his son struggle to breathe in an incubator. He knew what it felt like to lose everything in a single moment. He would not let Daniel experience that kind of pain. Daniel grew up in a bubble of comfort. He never learned to ride a bike because Richard was afraid he might fall and hurt himself. He never played competitive sports because Richard didn't want him to experience the pain of losing. He never had to work a part-time job because Richard provided everything he could ever want. He never had to face consequences for mistakes, because Richard always fixed things before consequences could arrive. On the surface, Daniel seemed happy. He smiled. He laughed. He went through the motions of a normal childhood. But beneath that surface, something was missing. A hollowness that Daniel himself couldn't identify, but could always feel. Like a plant grown in perfect conditions but never exposed to wind. His roots were shallow, like a bird kept in a golden cage. His wings had never been tested, like a butterfly. But we'll get to the butterfly. When Daniel was 17 years old, something happened that would plant a seed in Richard's mind. A seed that wouldn't bloom for many years, but would eventually change everything. It was a warm spring afternoon, and Richard was working in his home office when Daniel burst through the door, his eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, come quick. You have to see this." Richard followed his son to the backyard, where Daniel pointed to a low branch on the old maple tree. There, attached to a twig, was a chrysalis. Inside, they could see movement. A butterfly was preparing to emerge. Reacher and Daniel watched in fascination as a tiny hole appeared in the crease. A small head poked through, followed by the front legs of what would become a beautiful monarch butterfly. The creature pushed and struggled, trying to force its body through the impossibly small opening. It made progress, then stopped. Pushed again, then stopped. The struggle was clearly difficult, clearly exhausting. Daniel's face twisted with concern. "Dad, it's stuck. We have to help it." Reacher hesitated. Something in his gut told him to wait, but Daniel was already reaching for the chrysalis. "Help me get scissors. We can cut it open. We can't just let it suffer." Richard went inside and returned with small scissors. Together, father and son carefully cut open the chrysalis, freeing the butterfly from its struggle. The creature tumbled out onto Daniel's palm, and both of them smiled with satisfaction. They had saved it. They had prevented its suffering. But something was wrong. The butterfly lay in Daniel's hand, its wings shriveled and weak. It tried to move them, tried to lift off and fly, but nothing happened. The wings wouldn't expand. The body was swollen and heavy. The butterfly crawled in circles, desperate and confused, unable to do the one thing butterflies were born to do. "What's wrong with it?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with disappointment. "Why won't it fly?" Richard didn't know the answer then. He wouldn't learn the truth until years later, after it was far too late, so he made up an explanation. Maybe it was already damaged inside. Maybe it was sick. There was nothing we could do. They placed the butterfly on a flower and went inside. By the next morning, it was dead. Richard forgot about the incident almost immediately. It was just a butterfly, after all. Just a small tragedy in a world full of tragedies. It had nothing to do with him or his son or the life they were building together. He couldn't have been more wrong. Daniel graduated from high school without ever having faced a real challenge. Richo had hired tutors for every subject, had edited every essay, had called every teacher who dared give his son less than an... When it came time for college, Richard filled out the applications, wrote the entrance essays, and made generous donations to ensure admission. Daniel floated through 4 years of higher education the same way he had floated through everything else, carried on the current of his father's intervention. The problems didn't start until Daniel entered the real world. Richard had secured a position for his son at a prestigious architecture firm, calling in favors from old colleagues, making promises and donations. Daniel showed up on his first day in expensive clothes his father had bought, carrying a portfolio of work his father had helped create, armed with skills his father had never allowed him to develop on his own. The first week was a disaster. Daniel was assigned a simple project, something entry-level, something any graduate should have been able to handle. But when challenges arose, Daniel froze. He had never solved a problem on his own. He didn't know how. When his supervisor criticized his work, Daniel crumbled. He had never faced criticism before. His father had always shielded him from it. Richard received a panicked phone call that evening. "Dad, you have to help me. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do this. Please, you have to fix it." And Richard did what he had always done. To the office that night, read Daniel's work himself, and made the problem disappear. The next day, Daniel's supervisor was impressed by the miraculous improvement. But Daniel knew the truth, and the hollowness inside him grew deeper. This pattern repeated itself for years. Every job, every relationship, every decision in Daniel's life followed the same trajectory. Challenge arose, and Daniel never learned to stand on his own. By the time Daniel was 28 years old, he had lost 4 jobs, 3 relationships, and most of his self-respect. He was living in an apartment his father paid for, driving a car his father bought, eating food his father provided. The depression came slowly at first. Then, all at once, Daniel stopped leaving the apartment. He stopped answering calls. He stopped eating, stopped showering, stopped caring. The hollowness that had always been inside him had finally consumed everything else. There was nothing left but the void. Richard received a call from the hospital on a Tuesday evening. Daniel had been found unconscious in his apartment, an empty bottle of pills beside him, a note that contained only 3 words: "I can't anymore." Every mile was a lifetime. And in that car, alone with his terror, Richard began to see things he had refused to see for 28 years. Every time he had solved Daniel's problems, he had stolen an opportunity for growth. Every time he had shielded Daniel from struggle, he had weakened him. Every time he had carried his son over an obstacle, he had prevented the very development that would have made his son strong enough to face obstacles alone. And suddenly, inexplicably, Richard remembered the butterfly. He remembered how they had cut it free from its chrysalis. And for the first time, he wondered why. In the hospital waiting room, while doctors worked to save his son's life, Richard pulled out his phone and searched. He typed, "Why did the butterfly die when I helped it out of the cocoon?" What he read next shattered everything he thought he knew about love, protection, and fatherhood. The struggle to emerge from a chrysalis is not a cruel accident of nature. It is an essential part of the butterfly's development. As the butterfly pushes and fights to squeeze through the tiny opening, the effort forces fluid from its body into its wings. This process is what allows the wings to expand, strengthen, and become capable of flight. Without the struggle, the wings never develop. The butterfly emerges weak, swollen, and unable to fly. It will crawl helplessly until it dies. By helping the butterfly escape its cocoon, Richard had not saved it. He had doomed it. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He sat in that sterile waiting room. 28 years of stolen struggles. 28 years of cutting open the cocoon again and again and again, never understanding that he was crippling the very person he loved most. Daniel survived, but the recovery was long, painful, and far from certain. When Richard was finally allowed into the room, he found his son pale and weak, hooked up to machines that beeped and whirred, looking more fragile than he had since those first weeks in the incubator. Richard sat beside the bed and took his son's hand. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There were no words big enough for what had happened, what had been lost, what needed to change. Something I should have understood a long time ago. He paused, gathering strength. "Do you remember the butterfly?" Daniel's brow furrowed weakly. "What butterfly?" "When you were 17, we found a chrysalis in the backyard." A faint flicker of memory crossed Daniel's face. "It couldn't fly. It died." "Yes," Richard said, his voice cracking. "It died because we helped it. The struggle, the fight to push through that tiny opening. That's what makes a butterfly's wings strong enough to fly. Without the struggle, the wings never develop. Without the challenge, the butterfly can never become what it was meant to become." Tears were streaming down Richard's weathered cheeks now, carving rivers through 52 years of certainty. "I did that to you, Daniel, for your entire life. I cut open the cocoon. Every time you struggled, I stopped it. Every time you faced a challenge, I removed it. I thought I was loving you. I thought I was protecting you. But all I did was steal your chance to develop wings. All I did was ensure that you would never be strong enough to fly." Daniel listened in silence, too weak to respond with words, but understanding in his eyes. Richa continued, "When you were born premature, when you were fighting to breathe in that incubator, I felt so helpless. I swore I would never let you struggle like that again. I thought struggle was the enemy. I thought pain was something to be avoided at all costs. I didn't understand that some struggles are not obstacles to be removed. They are the very process by which we become who we're meant to be." He squeezed his son's hand tighter. "I can't undo 28 years. I can't give you back all the struggles I stole, but I can stop now. I can step back and let you fight your own battles, even when it's hard. Even when I want to help. Because helping too much is not love. It's robbery. It's stealing someone's chance to become strong." Daniele's eyes were wet now too. Daddy whispered, "It wasn't just you. E let you. I never pushed back. I never demanded to do things myself. I took the easy path because it was offered." Richard shook his head. "You were a child. You didn't know any better. I was the adult. I should have known that the greatest gift I could give you was not comfort but challenge, not ease, but effort. Not rescue but the space to rescue yourself." The hospital room was quiet for a long moment. The machines beeped. The world outside continued its indifferent spin, but in that small room, something was shifting. Something that had been wrong for almost 3 decades was finally being named, finally being confronted, finally being given the chance to heal. "What do we do now?" Daniel asked. Risha took a deep breath. We start over. We do it right this time. And that means I stop helping. He saw the fear flash across Daniel's face and held up a hand. Not because I don't love you, but because I love you enough to let you struggle, to let you fail, to let you build your own wings. Even though every instinct in me will scream to cut open the cocoon. Daniel nodded slowly, a tiny movement that contained a universe of courage. The recovery took years. Not just physical recovery, but the much harder work of psychological and emotional rebuilding. Daniel had to learn, at 28 years old, skills that most people develop in childhood. How to face a problem without immediately seeking rescue. How to sit with discomfort without being destroyed by it. How to fail, analyze, adjust, and try again. How to push through the tiny opening of the cocoon without someone cutting it open. There were setbacks. Many of them. Moments when Daniel wanted to give up. Moments when Richard's hands twitched toward the scissors, desperate to remove the struggle and make things easier. But they had made a pact. They had learned the lesson of the butterfly, and they were determined to do things differently. Daniel started with small challenges. Cooking his own meals, managing his own finances, having difficult conversations without his father's intervention. Each struggle was exhausting. Each small victory was earned with effort and sweat and sometimes tears. But with each struggle successfully faced, something changed inside Daniel. The hollowness that had plagued him his whole life began to fill with something new. Confidence. Self-reliance. The knowledge that he could face hard things and survive. Richard watched from a distance, his heart breaking and swelling simultaneously. It was agony to watch his son struggle. Every instinct screamed at him to help, to fix, to save. But he held back. He let Daniel push through the tiny opening. He let the effort force strength into wings that had been shriveled for too long. 3 years after that night in the hospital, Daniel walked into his father's house with news. He had landed a job on his own merit, without his father's connections or interventions. It was an entry-level position, far below what Richard could have secured for him with a single phone call. But Daniel's eyes were brighter than Richard had ever seen them. "I got it myself, Dad," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "They interviewed me, they tested me, they chose me. Not because of who you know or what you donated, because of me. But because you struggled for it. Because you fought through the cocoon, because you built your own wings." Daniel held his father. Tita, "Thank you for letting me struggle. I know it was hard for you, maybe harder than it was for me. But I needed it. I needed to know I could do hard things. And I couldn't know that unless you stepped back and let me try." In the years that followed, Daniel continued to grow. He faced challenges and sometimes failed. He experienced pain and sometimes crumbled. But he always got back up. He always tried again. The wings that had been shriveled and weak for so long were finally expanding, finally strengthening, finally learning to carry him into the sky. Richard watched his son fly, and he understood something profound. Real love is not about preventing struggle. Real love is about believing in someone enough to let them struggle. It's about trusting that they have the capacity to push through the tiny opening. Even when every instinct screams to cut the cocoon open, the butterfly that they had killed all those years ago had not died in vain. Its death had planted a seed that, years later, had bloomed into wisdom. Wisdom that had saved Richard from a lifetime of misguided protection. Wisdom that had given Daniel the chance to finally become who he was meant to be. Richard began sharing this lesson with other parents, other caregivers, anyone who would listen. He spoke at schools, at community centers, at parenting groups. He told the story of the butterfly and the cocoon. He shared his own mistakes, his own awakening, his own journey from protector to supporter. The message was always the same. Struggle is not the enemy. Struggle is the process by which we develop strength. When we remove every obstacle from someone's path, we don't help them. We cripple them. We ensure they will never develop the wings they need to fly. This doesn't mean we abandon those we love, Richard would explain. It doesn't mean we watch them suffer and do nothing. It means we support without rescuing. It means we encourage without solving. It means we trust that the struggle itself is sacred, that the effort is doing something inside them that our intervention would prevent. Some parents understood immediately. Others resisted, unable to imagine stepping back when their child was in discomfort. But a few A precious few heard the story of the butterfly and saw their own lives reflected in it. And those few went home and began the hard work of letting their children struggle, letting them fail, letting them push through the tiny openings that would make them strong. On Daniel's 35th birthday, he invited his father to dinner. They sat across from each other in a restaurant that Daniel had chosen, a restaurant Daniel was paying for with money he had earned himself, and reflected on how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked. "The years you spent protecting me. Do you wish you had done things differently from the start?" Reacher considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain my choices caused you. I regret the weakness I built into your life. But I'm not sure I could have done things differently." He paused. "I didn't know better. I thought I was loving you. It took the butterfly. It took almost losing you to teach me the truth." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes I wonder who I would have been if you had let me struggle from the beginning. Would I have been stronger? Would I have accomplished more?" Richard shook his head. "Maybe. Maybe not. What matters is who you are now. What matters is that you learned to fly. Not in the way most people learn. Not as a child or a teenager. But you learned. The wings you have now are real. They're yours. And they're strong because you built them yourself." Daniel smiled. "Because you finally let me struggle. Because I finally understood what the butterfly knew all along." They raised their glasses in a toast. To struggle, to growth, to wings that only come from fighting through the cocoon. Years later, when Richard was an old man and Daniel had children of his own, the butterfly story became a family legend. Daniel told it to his kids when they faced hard things. He told it when they wanted to quit. He told it when they came running to him, begging for rescue from some challenge that felt too big to face. "I could fix this for you," Daniel would say, echoing his father's words. "I could make the problem disappear, but if I do, you'll never learn to fix it yourself. And someday, you'll face something I can't fix, something only your own strength can overcome. What will you do then?" And then he would tell them about the butterfly. About the struggle to emerge, about the fluid that gets pumped into the wings. About what happens when someone cuts open the cocoon too soon. "The struggle is the gift," Daniel would say. "I know it doesn't feel like it. I know it hurts, but this is how you become strong. This is how you build wings, and I love you too much to steal that from you." It wasn't easy. Watching his own children struggle triggered every protective instinct Daniel had. He understood now why his father had done what he did. The urge to rescue was overwhelming, almost primal. But Daniel had lived the alternative. He had been the butterfly with shriveled wings. He knew the cost of too much protection, and he was determined not to repeat the mistake. His children grew up stronger than he had been, not because their lives were easy, but because they were allowed to be hard. They learned to solve problems because problems weren't solved for them. They learned to face failure because failure wasn't prevented. They learned to fly because no one cut open their cocoons. Richard lived long enough to see his grandchildren thrive, long enough to see the lesson he learned too late being applied in time, long enough to know that his greatest mistake had ultimately become his greatest gift, a cautionary tale that would protect future generations from the damage of excessive protection. On his deathbed, surrounded by Daniel, by grandchildren, by great-grandchildren he had barely met, Richard spoke his final words. They were words he had said many times before, but never with such weight. "Let them struggle," he whispered. "Let them push through the opening. Let them feel the exhaustion and the doubt and the desire to give up. And when they finally emerge, when they spread their wings for the first time and take flight, they will know something precious. They will know that they did it themselves, and that knowledge will carry them further than any rescue ever could." He closed his eyes, and the family that had learned to fly gathered around him, honoring a man who had made mistakes but found the courage to change. A man who had loved so deeply that he had almost loved his son into helplessness. A man who had discovered, through pain and loss and a dying butterfly, the sacred truth about struggle. At Richard's funeral, Daniel gave the eulogy. He told the story one more time. The chrysalis in the backyard. The scissors, the butterfly that couldn't fly. The years of misguided protection. The hospital room where everything changed, and the beautiful, painful, redemptive journey that followed. My father taught me many things, Daniel said through tears. But the most important lesson he ever taught me was this. Love is not the absence of struggle. Love is the presence of faith. Faith that the person you love has the strength to push through. Faith that the struggle itself is building something that ease never could. Faith that on the other side of the cocoon is a creature capable of flight. He looked out at the gathered mourners. I hope you'll have the courage to step back, even when it hurts, even when every instinct screams to help. Because the greatest gift you can give someone is not comfort. It's not ease. It's the chance to become strong, and strength only comes from one place. The struggle. Friends, if this story touched your heart, drop a comment telling me what lesson it taught you. Let me know what country you're watching from. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. There's more waiting for you right on your screen. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.